one of the interesting things of this book is I stage an encounter between them in the afterlife. But I'm not going to give that away right now. I want the readers to... Historians poach on literature, and when literary people try to do history, they say it's not history. So I want to refute that by showing that the great histories of our times, or even before, were written by literary people. Why is the Sangha important? So the literature is about the Sangh, okay, about bringing people together. That's our view. So they use the English language against English imperialism. So to conflate the two, जैसे हम लोग अभी अंग्रेजी में बोल रहे हैं, इसका ये मतलब नहीं है कि हम अंग्रेजियत के पक्ष में हैं. But Gandhiji said that modernity is suicidal. Why? Because, the rate at which we consume will make our habitat itself poisonous, toxic. And that has come true. All the Savarkarites, they don't take the argument to the next stage, which I do, which is, let us say that the Hindu Mahasabha had been in power. They were in charge, not the Congress. What would have happened? Have people thought about that?
Makarandji, one of the charges that literature students and people who write literature get is that we dwell a lot on what ifs.
So you have a new set of hyper-Hindus, I write about them here, who want to cancel, whatever remains. So one lot cancels all the right wing, the other lot cancels all the soft Hindus. What's left? Who's left?
So the whole conversation about civilizational amnesia, do you think the theorists who disagree with you, who reject you or who boycott you, do you think they are products of that amnesia, or are they the ones who are promoting?
And I am interested in the rishis of modern India, which includes Gandhi. I don't know if Savarkar was quite a rishi, though he had some attributes of a rishi. I mean, in this book I talk about how both were fearless and both died alone. They all want to be backward. Everybody, so there's a competitive backwardness. Dalit Brahmin is not my phrase. It comes from a Dalit writer himself. He's written about it. So what are we talking about? So I'm saying that these categories are themselves flawed, and we have to problematize these categories. Nobody will be left.
I think what's left is the liminality on which you meditate on. I think what will really be left behind are those ideas which have shaped us. And as you rightly said, binaries don't need to assimilate. They can coexist.
You have to incentivize excellence, but we don't. We incentivize, which side of the ideological spectrum you are, whom you know. Even today, somebody, doors will open.
My question is, with the conversation around development, how a nation should be, have we ever considered the fact that perhaps the subalterns don't want to come out and speak? Perhaps they're happy being unhappy, as you said. Hello and welcome to another episode of Shabd Vishwa. Thankful to the India Foundation for helping the Churn curate these extremely stimulating conversations with some of the most intellectual stalwarts of our time. Today in conversation we have Dr. Makarand Paranjpe. Makarandji is a prolific writer, has been in academia since the 1980s, has served at IIT Delhi, has served at the University of Hyderabad, JNU, ran IIAS for some time, and now he is the Sri Aurobindo Chair at Vedere University, which is an upcoming university in the US. So thank you so much for coming and giving us time. And let me begin with the latest work that you've published. Out of 55 publications, 55 books till now, and scores of academic articles in journals, essays, etc. So in Hindutva and Hindu Swaraj, Makarandji, how I read it as is a response to the colonial question through two conflicting ideologies, but somehow the magic in your work is that you've not made it seem like a conflicting ideology. Two binaries competing with each other. How do you see this tension being institutionalized in India? And what do you think has gained intellectual legitimacy over time?
Good. So, I mean, this is the book, and as happens with books, you somehow like your latest book until it remains the latest only for a little while because another book comes along. But yeah, I mean, I think this is the only attempt to try to, conduct a posthumous face-off between, as it were, Gandhi and Savarkar. And in a way, Mahatma Gandhi, Veer Savarkar, but also between Mohan and Vinayak, because I don't want to pedestalize these two figures. I see them in their own historical context and beyond that historical context. So in our present situation, obviously it's Hindutva which has become a little more mainstream, and you can even say that the ruling party's ideology, at least in, BJP 2.0, I mean, after the first experiment with Atal Bihari Vajpayee being in power, when they didn't quite get rid of Gandhism. They still had, if you read the BJP manifestos of that time, they still had Gandhian socialism as one of their planks. But now, since 14, but definitely 2024 and so forth, the shift towards Hindutva is palpable. And obviously, we've also seen the attempt to, I would definitely say, deplatform, even degrade Mahatma Gandhi. Nobody considers him a Mahatma anymore. I do, by the way. So the point is that we are losing our very, very powerful, soft power icon the world over by our own, not just disrespect, but I said degrading that whole legacy. Now, what I wanted to do in this book is to try to show how, when it comes to the Swaraj spectrum, these two so-called incommensurate, incompatible ideologies are actually, two sides of the Swaraj spectrum. So this is a Swaraj Samvad. In other words, when we wanted to overthrow British colonialism, we had many different paths and strategies. And at two ends of the Swaraj spectrum, one side, you had Savarkar, who said, let's overthrow the British violently through an armed rebellion, because that's the only way oppressors have been overthrown in the history, of humanity. Nobody's left peacefully. That never happens. And Gandhi said, no, that's not the way, at least for India. So that's the point of departure, and they never agreed till the very end of their lives. And in fact, one of the interesting things of this book is I stage an encounter between them in the afterlife. But I'm not going to give that away right now. I want the readers to engage with the book. But one more little thing, the interesting question in this book, or at least the point of departure, is that in 1909, two important books were written. The Indian War of Independence by Savarkar and Hind Swaraj by Gandhi. And both books were in a way written abroad. They were not written in India. Savarkar was in England at that time, in London. He wrote this book about a different way to think about the Great Revolt of 1857, which the British had called the mutiny, the Sepoy Mutiny. And he said, no, it was not the mutiny. It was the first War of Independence. So he starts the nationalist historiography. So this book is also a critique on history and on writing history. And then Gandhiji writes another kind of book, and some people say it was a response to Savarkar, or it was a response to the so-called revolutionaries he heard in India House. And it's, in a way, the handbook of non-violent revolution. So you had two handbooks, the handbook of violent revolution and the handbook of non-violent revolution, both coming out in the same year, both banned by the British colonial authorities. So it was a battle of the books, which became, a battle for India, and two ways of being Hindu, two ways of being Indian. And I wanted to make the point that you don't have to reconcile these two points of view. You can let them play, and you can see the value of both. And in fact, that's what I try to show, that what of Savarkar is relevant And what of Gandhi is relevant, and what we can do today in terms of our own nation building project, our own project to, Hind Swaraj or to create a great India is still an unfinished project, right? So, what we can get from both of these. And one more last thing I wanted to say before turning it back to you is I see this as a schism between Hindu society. Savarkar and Gandhi represent two polarities within Hindu society which need to be brought together. And I might say that the book has faced flack from both sides. Savarkarites or people who swear by Savarkar cannot tolerate Gandhi. And I'm also surprised to see that Gandhians cannot tolerate Savarkar. I mean, I have many Gandhian friends who have boycotted me, as it were. I'm used to being boycotted. I was heavily boycotted by the left in JNU. Most of my time in JNU was under a boycott. So it doesn't surprise me, but I'm also, as it were, a bit saddened at how there is a, should I say, entrenched hostility on both sides, which I wanted to reduce.
Yes, a book is also very experimental in form, the way in which the conversation unfolds. But as you said, let's leave it to the readers. I want to get back to why books, the kind of books that you've written, 55 books over a period of time, the arc of having that magnum opus. Is that there in your mind at some point in time? Do you want to write a magnum opus?
Well, I've given up on that because I think I've written, many, I think, important books in their own way without, I've written also about why it's difficult to write a magnum opus today. Because if you look at, the benchmarks like War and Peace, I mentioned War and Peace extensively here because, Itihas Mimamsa, I make the point that historians poach on literature. And when literary people try to do history, they say it's not history. So I want to refute that by showing that the great histories of our times, or even before, were written by literary people. I mean, they were written by great writers like, as I said, the history of the Napoleonic invasion of Russia. There's no better history, within quotes, history, than Tolstoy's War and Peace. It's got 150 characters or more, and the complexity of the narrative is absolutely fabulous and stunning. And, if you want to talk about India, Raj Tarangini is not history, it is Kavya. And similarly, I think you have better history written by Tagore and Bankim than historians of that period. We have hardly any cultural history. These people wrote history. Even the history of British India, the last phase, if you read E.M. Forster, you get a better sense of what was happening. Or even Kipling, whom we dislike, but was a great observer of Anglo-Indian reality. So I'm really making the point that, and that's the form of the book, the inventiveness of the form, the experimentation or the poetic form, you might call it, the poetics of history, comes from there that, you want to do a different kind of book. You don't want to do history the same way. And as I've said, there are multiple ways of accessing the past. And history, in the modern sense, the history that's done in history departments of JNU and DU and elsewhere, Allahabad and so forth, this is very new. But we have had many different ways of doing history, So the book is also about Itihas Mimamsa and a rediscovery, as it were, of what happened in the Indian pasts, which I call the Indian vasts, right? But to come back to your question, to write a book like Tolstoy's War and Peace or Crime and Punishment, like by Dostoevsky, or even a book, like Bleak House by Dickens, or, George Eliot's Middlemarch, since we are talking about women writers of great repute, is very difficult because you need not just physical space and chronological space, that is lots of time, which we don't have, because we are so, we are on a treadmill, as it were, and we're always working on the next project. But you also need great psychological space. And as you've had a child, we are biologically and professionally so beleaguered that we don't have the psychological space to write out a huge book, which will take 10 years to write. you don't even know if you're going to be alive for 10 years. So, but I think I've written one or two, like I wrote, my last book was called Identity's Last Secret, which combined poetry. I mean, I've started off as a poet. I've always been a poet. It's poetry, philosophy, literary criticism, and in a way, even politics. It's everything. So I think that's, if not a magnum opus, I think that's a very significant book. But people haven't read it, which brings us to a big crisis today, that everybody's a writer, but nobody's a reader. So public culture in India is in a transition, is in a churn. Your program is called the Churn. And, as I grow older, I've given up the idea of trying to write a magnum opus, frankly. But who knows? Who knows?
But then what is literature to you? I know it's a very cliched question to a professor of literature, but contextualizing this the kind of conversation that we are having right now, what is the import of literature today? Why is it important?
No, but depends on what you mean by literature. So, the traditional definitions are very valuable, both Western and Eastern. So, Eastern we meant by literature sahitya, that which produces the well-being of everyone. Sahit, And it's also about this, the whole saha. Once you bring in that saha, saharataya, sahastitva, it's all about togetherness. It's not just something that I sit in a room and produce. No, it's about, sangachatvam, samvadatvam. It's about the collective. And I talk about that. I talk about the collective, as we say, Kali Yuge Sanghe Shakti, or you can, because it's Sanskrit, you can put the words in any order. Why is the Sangha important? So the literature is about the Sang, okay, about bringing people together. That's our view. And Tagore also believed that. And the Western view is also very interesting because literature comes from letters. Letters. What are letters? Letters are the letters of the alphabet. And again, to go back to India, and you had a person who spoke about the tantras last time. It's akshar. So every letter is indestructible, and as it were, the whole universe, Nada Brahman, it's created out of letters, out of spota. So, this is an indestructible power of letters. But in the West, they meant the letters that were, as it were, put together by the lettered, as opposed to the unlettered. So when we say Savarna, we think about jati. Varna means color, but it also means people who are shikshit and ashikshit. It's not just about caste as we understand it. So in the West, fundamentally what I'm trying to say is everything that was written as opposed to spoken was literature. And that is profound because when I think about myself as someone who works in literature, basically anything that's written is grist to my mill. In other words, I think I have the knowledge, the expertise, if you want to use that word, the power, and the training to understand anything that's written. Now, I'm not talking about a formula in mathematics. That's written in a manner of speaking. I'm excluding that. But essentially, I would say, as a man of letters, as a person devoted to letters or to literature, I feel I can read anything, from poetry, from humanities, from the purest mantric poetry, right to humanities, from humanities to social studies. Not that which is quantitative, entirely quantitative, but whether it's sociology, political science, which is not a science, as you know, but history, philosophy, definitely, economics. I think I can read all of these, and not just read them, but not only read and make sense of them, but actually contribute to our understanding of them. So literature gives me the depth and breadth that allows me to understand the entire sweep of human civilization. So this is a very tall claim to make on behalf of literature. But I think it is literature that gives the deep cognition that we lack so much today in the world of pseudo-cognition. Because what is AI? AI is pseudocognition. Large language models can string together words better than most graduate students can, but they don't really have cognition. And so today, more than ever, I would say we need the arts, we need humanities, whereas the dispensation wants only STEM. They think all the arts are contaminated, humanities are contaminated, social studies are contaminated. Nikalo inko, sab Marxwadi hai. Of course, they don't read Marx. They don't even know the 120 shades of Marxism or even more. And they don't even know which one they are opposing. So it's just become a label to call somebody something, so that you can either condemn them. It's the same thing. I was reading, people don't know how to read as well, by the way. So I was reading The Private Life of Chairman Mao by Dr. Lee, his personal physician. We really need to read a book like that today. And in China, everybody was called a rightist before they had to be removed or purged or sent into exile or re-education. Today, we want to re-educate people in a similar fashion by calling them leftists, as if being a leftist is some kind of sin, original sin. Who knows? But coming back to literature, I think it is reading deeply, thinking about thinking. So this book is not just about history, it's about thinking. It's about thinking about thinking.
You've also written Making India, a collection of essays on delving and meditating deeply on the Indian national question. Now,
and also,
yes,
on how that gets mediated through English, because the subtitle, it's really about English authority. So today we want to dethrone English, which is wonderful, but we haven't, come to terms with the fact that many of the people who fought for Swaraj did it
absolutely
in English. So they use the English language against English imperialism. So to conflate the two, जैसे हम लोग अभी अंग्रेजी में बोल रहे हैं, इसका ये मतलब नहीं है कि हम अंग्रेजियत के पक्ष में हैं, कि उसके हम पक्षधर हैं, हम बिल्कुल नहीं है। और अंग्रेजी बोलने से हम कोई पाप नहीं कर रहे हैं, और इसका ये मतलब नहीं है कि हम अपनी भाषा भूल रहे हैं, बल्कि अंग्रेजी में जो पढ़े लिखे थे उन्होंने भारतीय भाषाओं के साहित्य और भाषा के विकास में इतना बड़ा योगदान दिया है कि जो सबसे बड़े लेखक हुए हैं अपनी भाषाओं में, उनका कुछ अंग्रेजी से परिचय हुआ, और उस अंग्रेजी के परिचय के कारण और उसके द्वारा जो यूरोपीय संस्कृति और बहुभाषीय साहित्य के साथ उनका जैसे परिचय हुआ, उससे हमारे यहाँ भी एक पुनरुत्थान हुआ जो हम समझ नहीं पा रहे हैं, जैसे उस तरफ भी हुआ। यूरोप में पहले तो उन्होंने ग्रीक और लैटिन साहित्य पढ़ने पर उनको बहुत कुछ ज्ञान भी मिला और स्फूर्ति इतनी मिली कि ऊर्जा इतनी मिली उससे कि उन्होंने जो रेनेसांस कहते हैं उसकी शुरुआत वहाँ से, और उनका दूसरा रेनेसांस हुआ जो उसको एनलाइटनमेंट कहते हैं, जिसकी वजह ये थी कि संस्कृत, फारसी और फिर आगे चाइनीज़ और जापानीज़ ऐसी भाषाओं के साथ उनका परिचय हुआ और उन्होंने इतना उसका फ़ायदा उठाया, तो हम क्यों नहीं अंग्रेज़ी का फ़ायदा उठाए? और आप किसी को भी पूछ लीजिए, वो कहेंगे हाँ मैं तो अंग्रेज़ी सीखना चाहता हूँ, है ना। तो आजकल ऐसी विडंबना है कि अंग्रेज़ी को उतारने की कोशिश हो रही है, और ये एक मेरे हिसाब से एक बहुत दुर्भाग्यपूर्ण चीज़ है, क्योंकि हमें हर भाषा को अच्छी तरह सीखना चाहिए, और है ना। और अज्ञानता में क्यों हम लोग फ़ख्र करें? अज्ञानता पे गर्व करना एक मूर्खता ही है। तो किसी भी भाषा को अच्छी तरह न आना, उसमें गर्व करना मेरे हिसाब से, जैसे कोई हिंदी भाषी है तो उनको हिंदी भी कहाँ आती है। अब हम जो हिंदी बोलते हैं, आप उनको एक अवधि किताब दे दीजिए, रामचरितमानस ही दीजिए या ब्रज भाषा में कुछ दीजिए, पढ़ पाएंगे? कौन पढ़ पाता है ना। तो ये हमारी विडंबना है। तो हम कहते हैं कि सिर्फ डिजिटल लिटरेसी से काम बन जाएगा, फ़ोन के आगे हम बैठे रहेंगे और हमें ज्ञान मिल जाएगा। वैसे ज्ञान प्राप्ति नहीं हो सकती। तो इसलिए मैं कह रहा था कि जो आपने जिस किताब का जिक्र किया, भारत कैसे बना और उस भारत के निर्माण में क्या सोच थी, और उस सोच के पीछे अंग्रेजी में लिखने वालों ने क्या योगदान दिया, वो किताब थी जिसका आपने जिक्र किया।
हिंदुत्व, हिंद स्वराज और मेकिंग इंडिया, इन दोनों किताबों को जो हम एक टाइम फ्रेम में देखते हैं, तो इस किताब के कोई ऐसे आर्ग्यूमेंट्स हैं जो आपने मेकिंग इंडिया के आर्ग्यूमेंट्स का पुनश्चरण करके उसमें डाला हो?
नहीं, ये दो किताबें कुछ अलग हैं। हालांकि उनमें एक, क्या कहते हैं, एक धारा तो दिखेगी आपको, है ना। क्योंकि देखिए ना, इस किताब को अगर आपको किसी और किताब से एक संवाद में लेना हो, तो मैंने 1993 में एक दूसरी किताब लिखी थी जिसका शीर्षक था डीकॉलोनाइजेशन एंड डेवलपमेंट, हिंद स्वराज रिविजन। तो वो भी एक संवाद ही था, एक शिक्षक और एक विद्यार्थी में एक वो संवाद के रूप में वो किताब लिखी गई। और उसमें भारत में जो विकास का प्रश्न था उसको लेके हिंद स्वराज की दृष्टिकोण से या हिंद स्वराज के मापदंड के द्वारा समझने की कोशिश की गई कि भारत में क्या हो रहा है। और क्योंकि हिंद स्वराज जो गांधी ने लिखी थी वो सिर्फ एक राजनैतिक किताब नहीं थी, उसमें एक समाज की रचना के बारे में एक गहरी सोच थी और आधुनिक था, जो हम कहते हैं मॉडर्निटी, और जो कैपिटलिस्ट मॉडर्निटी थी। तो ये आधुनिकता की आलोचना थी, बहुत कड़ी आलोचना है उस किताब में। और गांधी जी की प्रस्तावना ये है, हालांकि उसमें हम कह सकते हैं अतिशयोक्ति भी बहुत है, जैसे रेलवे के खिलाफ उन्होंने लिखा और खुद रेलवे में जाते थे, और अस्पतालों के खिलाफ लिखा, लेकिन उसमें बहुत मार्मिक चीज़ कही गई। जैसे आप दूसरों की जान लेकर के, जैसे जानवरों की जान लेकर के उन पे अत्याचार करके आविष्कार, अगर किसी भी नए ड्रग, किसी भी नए चिकित्सा का संशोधन आप करेंगे, तो गांधी जी के हिसाब से ये मानवता के लिए अच्छा नहीं होगा। और आजकल जैसे गिनी पिग्स तो हम कहते ही हैं, लेकिन बंदर है या रैट्स, माइस जो कहते हैं, चूहों पर मतलब इतना अत्याचार कर करके हम नए ये पदार्थों का हम आविष्कार कर रहे हैं। सो गांधी जी में जो सोच थी उनकी हिंद स्वराज में, वो एक आधुनिकता की आलोचना थी या समीक्षा थी। और उन्होंने ये कहा था कि आधुनिक जो संस्कृति है, आधुनिक जो हमने ये संरचना की है, पूरे दुनिया में आधुनिकता फैली है ना। और इसके फैलाव में कितने मानस जनजातियों का नुकसान हुआ है, बल्कि उनका नरसंहार हुआ है, जेनोसाइडल है। मॉडर्निटी इज जेनोसाइडल, राइट? Luckily in India, our so-called Adivasis, Vanvasis, whoever they are, the ancient people of India, they've still survived. But Gandhiji said that modernity is suicidal. Why? Because, the rate at which we consume will make our habitat itself poisonous, toxic. And that has come true. So, मैं उस हिसाब से देख रहा था कि भारत में क्या हो रहा है. And obviously, not only Nehru turned against that idea of Gandhi, but everybody else has. Techno-modernity we embrace today. And we somehow think that we embrace techno-modernity and we can bring in something from the Vedas, bring in something from the Upanishads, and make this mixture and save the world and become Vishwaguru. And actually we have not figured out what is the formula of doing that. So, in other words, to answer your question, this book is in dialogue with an earlier book which was trying to, as it were, look at this question of modernity. But in what I've tried to do, it does continue from Making India in a way. But I'm really looking at these two figures who give you two diametrically opposite ways of getting rid of the British, but not only getting rid of the British, but making the new India. And Gandhi wanted an inclusive India, where all citizens had equal rights. It was a civic nationalism, in a way, even a dharmic nationalism, okay? And Hindutva had bits of that, but it was really trying to protect the Hindus because, and I respect Savarkar greatly for that, and I mention it in the book, that in his Indian War of Independence, he wants a joint front, Hindu-Muslim unity against British rule. And he talks about the great heroes of 1857 who were both Hindus and Muslims. And he has wonderful things to say about people we don't like today, jihadis, if you want to call them. But Savarkar is quite positive about some of those people. In fact, one of them, I've mentioned him in this book. He wanted to destroy Hanumangadi. He was such a Ghazi who went against, obviously, British rule as a part of the so-called revolt or mutiny. But he was very anti-Hindu. But Savarkar makes him a hero as well.
Because I think Savarkar's idea of his dealing with power was very strategic.
Exactly. But before that, he had the same tendencies as all the great Indian freedom fighters for a united India. But then he saw that Muslim separatism was a threat. And he perceived this threat in a manner that was far more stark and strategic, I'm glad you brought the word in, than Gandhi and all the Congresses. And so you can call it appeasement. They went on and on and on appeasing, and Savarkar said, stop it. But all the Savarkarites, they don't take the argument to the next stage, which I do, which is, let us say that the Hindu Mahasabha had been in power. And they were in charge, not the Congress. What would have happened? Have people thought about that? We haven't. I don't think we have. And I have an answer to that. I haven't written about it in this book, but I have an answer. I've hinted about it.
But Makarandji, one of the charges that literature students and people who write literature get is that we dwell a lot on what ifs.
No, why do you say that? What is? Itihas, what was? Literature, what is? So it happened. But it's all literature. The so-called Itihas of India is all literature.
That I agree with
Ramayana,
you.
Mahabharata, the Puranas.
Some historians might take umbrage to the fact that you said that Raj Tarangini is not
I want to provoke the historians. Anyhow, they'll boycott me. They'll say this is not history.
Yes.
And indeed, we tell them what you write is not history but literature. I say, aap literature hi likh rahe ho. See, Romila Thapar only writes literature of a different kind. It's not that she's writing history because she's leaving things out. She's making her own narratives. By the way, she's a character in this book. You can read about it. She comes to St. Stephen's and I interact with her. Anyhow, so the point being that Hayden White and others have mentioned how history is also a form of narrative. It's also an arrangement of what is known as a fact, but we really don't know what a fact is. A fact is itself a mystery. So this is what I want to say, by the way. One of the contributions of this book to historiography is to say that history is a mystery. See, as a poet, I'm rhyming also. And the object of a historian is to try to decode that mystery, And Nietzsche also wrote about the different kinds of histories, the monumental history, which we want today. We go back and such a great hero, as opposed to a critical history, as opposed to simply a record of what happened.
How did St. Stephen's mold you as a scholar?
It hardly did. See, I wrote another piece on this. There was a book called the St. Stephen's School of Writing, and so many Indian English writers have come out of St. Stephen's, as you know. I don't have to enumerate them, but there are, literally dozens or scores of them, all the top writers. And I'm not one of the top writers, but I'm also from there. And I critique in my essay in that book, the St. Stephen's School of Literature, I critique the culture of St. Stephen's as one that worships success. And I want to say that my tradition is that of those who, if not worship, but those who seek and speak the truth. I'm not a success worshipper, right? So this whole book is about truth-telling and truth-seeking. So in that sense, I went contrary to the Stephanian, should I say, the Stephanian ethos, because I did what my inner being and I took risks being wanted. I was a very good student prior to getting into St. Stephen's of physics, chemistry, and math. My elder brother was in IIT Bombay. There was a career path ahead. And I broke from that, much to my mom's horror. because she was more practical. My dad was, I remember my mother saying, look, we are not going to open a shop for you. We have no money. And she put me in touch with her literature teacher. She had already also studied literature. Professor M.K. Nayak, who used to teach at Dharwad. He was a great scholar, by the way, a Fulbrighter. And he wrote me a wonderful postcard, which I remember still when I was 16, 17, before I joined St. Stephen's. And he said that, okay, you've taken literature. Now you'll have to go all the way to a PhD. Or you'll have to go door to door selling detergent. And I think that was a brilliant, way to dissuade or even encourage, depending on how you look at it. And door-to-door selling detergent wasn't bad, because I could have tried to become a Hindustan Lever management trainee, which was the best thing you could do at that time. It was one of the top professions. And I got not for Hindustan Times, but I did get called for a trainee, at Times of India, and also at one of the biggest advertising companies at that time, just after I finished my BA Honours in English. So I didn't take the career path. I didn't write the GMAT or the GCAT. I didn't. Instead, I wrote the GRE. I went to the US after my BA in English, which was also unusual. So, in a way, I'm not your typical Stephanian.
Sure. I asked this question because I was trying to bring the colonial and post-colonial conversation here. You've written a lot on decolonization also. Books like these, the one that you are writing, you're also a part of a corpus, whether they like it or not. You are a part of that, literature being produced, which talks about our civilizational ethos. Not that books have not been written before, but just that the conversations are more ripe around this. So the whole conversation about civilizational amnesia, do you think the theorists who disagree with you, who reject you, or who boycott you, do you think they are products of that amnesia, or are they the ones who are promoting this amnesia?
It's a complicated question. I'll tell you why. So I was not a part of the, so-called regular post-colonialists either. Whether they are, you name them, Homi Bhabha and Gayatri Spivak, all of them, they're mostly leftists. And Arif Darlik, one of the people, a Turkish post-colonialist, he put it very well. He says post-colonialism begins when, basically academics from the third world gate crash into the first world. So, the subaltern school was something that Ranjit Guha and others came up with, which was, I think, a unique contribution, in my view, at least, to historiography. But I don't think post-colonialism is as profound or significant as that, because it was really a career move. And, the Australians contributed to it, others did, but the founding father was Edward Said in a way. But the point I'm trying to make is that none of the post-colonialists went to jail, none of them suffered, for their views, and neither were they Frantz Fanon, nor were they Gandhi. And for a long time, they never included Gandhi. It's Leela Gandhi and others, his own great-granddaughter, who said, look, Gandhi is a post-colonialist, because he fought against. Forget about including Savarkar. Forget about including some of the revolutionaries of India, though Bhagat Singh makes it because he was a leftist. So it's a contaminated field, is what I was trying to say, right? So, and I had dinner with a great post-colonialist, I won't name the person, one of the founding members, and, she teaches at an Ivy League school, and I gave her something that I had written, and then, she said, Makarand, the problem with you is you're too Hindu identified. And I thought to myself that being Hindu identified becomes a reason to cancel somebody in the old post-colonialism. By the old post-colonialism, I mean the classic post-colonialists who came in the wake of Edward Said. Now you have a new right-wing kind of Hindutva post-colonialism, and they are cancelling and boycotting people because they think that, oh, you had no civilizational insight, no civilizational ethos. But just think, they are cancelling Ram Mohan Roy. They say Ram Mohan Roy was a collaborator. They are cancelling Gandhi. They're saying Gandhi is a collaborator. Then they are cancelling all kinds of people. So the earlier lot, they said, you know what, there's not much of a difference between, let's say, a Savarkar and a Sri Aurobindo. Both are right-wing, or a Bankim. Oh, both are Hindu. So they cancel. Now we are doing the opposite. And there are people who want to cancel Sri Ramakrishna because he says all paths, joto mot toto pot. So he also tried to practice Islam for some time, if you know. And they said, look at this guy. He's a collaborator. They cancel Ramana Maharishi because he says, you don't have to be Hindu. You can find truth. You can find, the ultimate reality wherever you are. So you have a new set of hyper-Hindus, I write about them here, who want to cancel, whatever remains. So one lot cancels all the right wing, the other lot cancels all the soft Hindus. What's left? Who's left? Nobody will be left.
I think what's left is the liminality on which you meditate on. I think what will really be left behind are those ideas which have shaped us. And as you rightly said, binaries don't need to assimilate. They can coexist.
Precisely. See, that's the other thing, by the way, liminality. This is a buzzword. But you have to take the so-called mainstream figures at their liminal, you have to challenge them at their liminal extremes. That's what I've done. I've challenged both Gandhi and Savarkar. So what we were trying to do is we were always looking for margins. So I have written, everyone wants to be in the margin. Then who's in the center? So, okay, you want to appropriate, like there was a recent talk by a, very famous ex-JNU, now a US-based political theorist. And he said, look, all of you what do you want to do? What is your aspiration? You want to go to the US and then you want to shout Intifada and pro-Palestine slogans. You don't want to go to Gaza, right? So I'm just trying to make the point that people who are privileged want to appropriate the subject positions of the underprivileged. And I think that's not only dishonest, but it doesn't lead anywhere. We have to take responsibility for our subject positions. In my case, for being male, for being middle class, for being, so to speak, upper caste. Why should I vacate the space? I should occupy it responsibly. Rather than trying to say, no, I'm not one of these. I identify with the lowest of the low, but I will live in a nice place. I will have air conditioning. I will have a nice air purifier. I will never visit a slum, or if I do, whatever it is, I don't want to play these games. I think that the center is more important than the margin in any society at any time. But I'll also tell you, I'll contradict myself to an extent by saying that the intellectual is always in the margin. An intellectual can never be mainstream, right? And as Arnold Toynbee, it's attributed to him, but I don't know if he really said it because I couldn't find it in a study of history. So he says that the intelligentsia is born unhappy.
But can I critique it?
So I'm happy to be unhappy because what I'm just trying to say is I can never belong. I can never belong to the left or to the right, to the ruling party or to the opposition. I can only belong to truth. And this truth that I belong to, which I'm dedicated to, is not the truth of today or yesterday or tomorrow. It's a different dimension. It's the truth of all times. And therefore, I feel that I'm really in good company, that I may be in a minority of one in the present context, but I believe I'm in the culture and civilization forming minority. I mean, this culture, this country we think has been founded by rishis of ancient India. I believe it. And I am interested in the rishis of modern India, which includes Gandhi. I don't know if Savarkar was quite a rishi, though he had some attributes of a rishi. I mean, in this book, I talk about how both were fearless and both died alone. There are many interesting things, and both were brave, but their paths were very different. But I certainly think that Sri Aurobindo was a rishi, Tagore was a rishi, we had Ramana Maharishi was a rishi, I feel, and many more, Sri Ramakrishna, Vivekananda. So these are the people who founded modern India, and these are the people I'm interested in.
I want to get back to a more academic question around, again, colonization, post-colonization, decoloniality, indigenous studies. Now, there was this whole attempt, as you rightly said, to put everybody who does not agree with you on the margins and try and appropriate their voice and call it by a new attractive name. Where do you see the question of indigenous studies in India? Do you see India is actually opening up in the academic space? Or even worldwide? You talked about Australia and New Zealand. There's a lot of focus on indigeneity and indigenous studies. Our engagement with post-colonialism was hardly an engagement with the Adivasi community. It was only to appropriate them that some of the stalwarts, and I shall not name them, you know who they are, some of them wrote about them because it served a particular purpose of speaking to the...
You mean the subaltern?
The subaltern, yeah. The subaltern, let the subaltern speak. And when but there were no subalterns speaking. There were these English educated. I don't have, I mean, this whole conversation is English. I don't have anything against English. But how can the subaltern speak in English?
No, that's the point. I think the arguments, Vivek's argument is they cannot represent themselves. So you should represent them. Now, see, there are two aspects to it. I responded to that. I said, the subaltern cannot speak, you say. But when the subaltern speaks, you're not there to listen.
Yes,
So
I mean, let me rephrase it. Subalterns do
also-
speak,
that's
not in
my
your
point.
language.
That's it.
Not in your language,
That's
not
it.
in your episteme, and not in
That's
your
it. That's
format.
That's where I would agree with you that when they are ready to speak or when they've always spoken, then you don't listen to them, and then you say the subaltern can't speak. But she's also right to the extent that unless they're represented in the so-called dominant, like see, you want to buy something, you go to a shop called the Tribes. They say, these cloves have been plucked by Adivasis in Koraput and they're straight, from the tree. They're not polished. You have to market. See, the point is there's no life outside the market. So academics is also a market. So you have to translate. So what I'm trying to say is you can't completely negate. See, if you take the writer that she was writing about, in whose
Makarand ji,
context.
you said, I'm happy being unhappy.
No, let me just
Did
finish
we
this
speak-
point. Let
did
me
we speak-
finish this point because
Sure.
it's very important.
Sure.
So it's in the context of translating Mahashweta Devi into English. Now, Mahashweta Devi is a dominant, she's an upper caste, upper class Bengali Bhadralok lady. She's writing about the Santals, okay? Now, are we trying to say that's only appropriation? I wouldn't go to that extent. Gopinath Mahanti wrote Paraja. Other people have written about those disenfranchised people, in dominant languages of their area, whether it's Odia, Bangla, Marathi. The whole Dalit Sahitya upsurge in Marathi came from the so-called subalterns who were just neo-literate, and suddenly they burst forth with great vitality. So my point is that, and who translated them into English? All the Savarnas, they got together. They said, okay, they should be represented. So I don't want to completely say that doesn't work. But I'm also saying, whether it's Tijan Bai, whoever they are, there's no uncontaminated space where the subalterns exist in some kind of idyllic heaven. They're constantly right back to our classical times, to the times of Ekalavya. That whole story has been read in 100 different ways. So they're not apart from us. This is what I'm saying. So indigeneity and these Aboriginal studies, they don't apply to India in quite that way. So, and we haven't developed the vocabulary. So just to finish the point, when the subalterns do speak, we have to listen. But which languages do they speak in? Those languages are all vanishing. And we also have to bring them through translation and through representation into some kind of mainstream. I mean, both processes are important. I hope this addresses your point.
No, I'm trying to articulate a different question. The question is this: can the subalterns speak, are we listening to the subalterns? Is a conversation on the premise that there is a conversation going on in the mainstream where the subalterns want participation. My question is, with the conversation around development, how a nation should be, have we ever considered the fact that perhaps the subalterns don't want to come out and speak? Perhaps they're happy being unhappy, as you said.
No, of course. I mean, among the Aboriginals in Australia, and I've done some work on that, they don't want to speak. Everything about their knowledge is secret. But they're perishing also. So, what does that tell you? See, coming back to India, what was this whole Medha Patkar, etc. about? She was trying to say that your Narmada is going to, displace a lot of people who don't want to be a part of your development project. And then, once they are displaced, they will have to come to your homes and do jhadu pocha bartan because they have no livelihood.
Because as you rightly pointed out, we don't have the language to even articulate their pain. It's a Medha Patekar who is doing that. Medha Patekar does not come from that region. She's again speaking for
I agree. So, but then you can look at the few examples that did manage, right? Like, let's say, Birsa Munda. I mean, we have a parallel, you might call it canon. We have deified them also now. Rani Gaindilu. There are so many such examples. Birsa Munda is only one, but there was many, right? And there is Mundali, there are all these languages. Now, you and I, how many of us have bothered to learn those languages either? There are vanishing languages, even as we speak. So linguicide, English is the number one homicidal language in the world. You come in contact with English and your own language starts dying. And this is also true of standard Hindi. I mean, your own mother tongue, your child may not know your mother tongue, whether it's Awadhi, Bhojpuri, Rajasthani, Kumaoni. None of these children growing up in Delhi knows these languages. They don't know Bhojpuri. They don't know whether it's Garhwali or Kumaoni. They don't know the difference. Hindi, as we know it, is so many languages, at least 20, 30, Dakhini. I grew up in the South, I wrote a paper called Hindi Hai Hum. तो उसमें मैंने ये कहा मैंने हिंदी दक्षिण में सीखी है, मैंने दिल्ली में हिंदी नहीं सीखी है. तो मेरी जो हिंदी जो मैंने सीखी थी वो कोई नहीं बोलता आजकल, वो हिंदी बोली नहीं जाती है. So my point is that these categories. So one is a problem with categories, but the other is actually a problem of as Marx would say, the reproduction of inequality. Inequality gets reproduced. And that is why we are talking about creamy layers. So within, there is SC, ST, STs. Now, why was Uttarakhand? One reason you have states like that is because otherwise they'll get swamped. Like, if you go to the northeast, everybody's ST. So the Manipur conflict is because the Meiteis are OBCs. The Meiteis who occupy the plains, they don't get the benefits of the STs and the SCs. So they want to be rebranded. So it's reverse. We talked about Sanskritization, M.N. Srinivas. Now it's the opposite. It is Dalitization. Everybody wants to be backward. The more backward you are, the Marathas, they were ruling. Now they want to be backward. The Jats want to be backward. Reddys, Kammas, whoever they are, not Kammas, but Kapus, not Reddys maybe, but they all want to be backward. Everybody, so there's a competitive backwardness. In this competitive backwardness, people may also all want to be Adivasis. Everybody wants to be ST. If you can get a job, if you can get something, why not? So, the point being that there is a mismatch. There is a mismatch between the world of the discourse. Like today, there's a person in JNU, he's saying reservations are not enough. You have to make repatriations. So the state should be giving money. And some of us are saying there should be de-reservation along with reservation. Otherwise, you've created a new Dalit Brahmin class. And Dalit Brahmin is not my phrase. It comes from a Dalit writer himself. He's written about it. So what are we talking about? So I'm saying that these categories are themselves flawed. And we have to problematize these categories, whether they are aboriginal, indigenous, or multicultural, or whatever these categories are that came to us through post-colonialism. These categories need to be problematized.
Final question before we wind up. How far does your personal, how far do you get involved in your personal capacity when it comes to writing?
Yeah, so, people call me a public intellectual because what happened is during the JNU Andolan, our great right wing, nobody came forward to speak. I was the only one who took a stand against Kanhaiya Kumar. I got boycotted, and I don't know where our great ABVP and all these other people were at that time. I was alone. I was surrounded by all these people. So what I'm trying to say is obviously you put yourself out, But I got thrust into this debate on nationalism. I got thrust into this debate about left versus right, partly because of circumstances, partly because of what happened in 2016 in JNU. So what happened before 2016? I was an intellectual, but I was a private intellectual, right? Then I became a public intellectual, and now I'm going to be a private intellectual again. I'm not going to stop being an intellectual, because why am I going to become a private intellectual again? Because I'm afraid that the things I say today are not palatable. See, they were not palatable to one set of people at that time. And I've written a little bit about it here in this book. They're not palatable to another set of people today. Because what I'm trying to say to you is that we want to be a knowledge society, we want to be Vishwaguru, but we are heading towards an anti-intellectualism. We don't respect intellectuals. So when we were talking informally, I told you that I give these, मैंने ये स्कीम बनाई है कि बुद्धिजीवी किस तरह के होते हैं. So there are सरकारी बुद्धिजीवी है जिनकी रोजी रोटी सरकारी जो सरकार कहती है उसको दोहराने में है. There are सरकारी इंटेलेक्चुअल्स. फिर उनके विपक्ष में बैठे हुए NGO इंटेलेक्चुअल्स होते हैं. तो जो NGO से उनकी आजीविका मिलती है या उनको विदेश के टिकट मिलते हैं या कुछ भी कहिए. So they are intellectuals are always criticizing the government. चाहे कुछ भी अच्छा भी हो तो भी they will criticize. Because in a way they are paid to criticize the government, okay? NGO intellectuals. Then there are embassy intellectuals. वो भी हैं. तो embassy intellectuals ऐसे हैं कि they get tied up with some American embassy है, British council है, Germans हैं, जहाँ पैसा मिलता है वहाँ पे, अच्छा वहाँ मुफ्त में शराब भी मिलती है. तो embassy intellectuals भी होते हैं. And so there are also genuine academics, researchers. ये कम ही है क्योंकि our universities are declining, okay? The state universities are declining because we don't have a culture of excellence. And even in STEM, there's a big crisis. See, I taught at an IIT. I just want to tell you one thing, that the smartest people in IITs are the undergrads, and then they leave. But today there are more postgrads than undergrads. And the postgrads, who are not all that smart, IITs are made up of them. And now the government is trying to give them lots of money. You have to create a culture of excellence. You have to incentivize excellence, but we don't. We incentivize, which side of the ideological spectrum you are, whom you know. Even today, somebody, doors will open. Your caste, chacha, bhatija, it's a combination of a feudal and a casteist kind of mentality, okay? This is a largely, a broad and not so polite way of characterizing India. But in this book, I've also hinted at, that's a different conversation, but an OBC nation. This is an OBC nation in the making, which is a good thing in my view, But to answer your question, the point being that there is a time when an intellectual whose job is to seek and speak the truth, speaks truth to power, yeah? That's the ancient Hebraic way. The Hebraic prophets used to try to speak truth to power and risk their lives, right? You try to speak truth to power. If there are no takers, it's all right. You can be a private intellectual and you can be equally happy, being a private intellectual. But I want to say that I have great hopes, I have great faith, I have great confidence and great aspirations for India. Because the India story is bigger than any one party, any one dispensation, any one ideology, any one community, any one, past, any one religion, any one language. The India story is so big, that I think I want to tell you, it's very humbling. As I age, I feel that बहुत कुछ सीखना है. I'm a lifelong learner. And हम लोग क्या है ना, एक बहुत बड़ी लहर है. उसके ऊपर तिनके हैं. हम लोग वो तिनके हैं. थोड़ा सा उछल जाते हैं तो लगता है अरे बहुत कुछ हमने किया. हमने तो कुछ नहीं किया है. बहुत कुछ समझा है और बहुत कुछ लिखा पढ़ा भी है. लेकिन परिश्रम करना है, वो परिष्कृत करना है अपने आप को, अपनी चेतना को, अपने स्वभाव को. और वो तो एक निरंतर प्रयास है, जैसे one of your previous speakers says, you have to polish the vessel. By the way, this is very interesting. This comes from Totapuri. Totapuri was Sri Ramakrishna's teacher. And he used to have only one, वो एक, उनका लोटा था. उसको हर रोज गंगा किनारे जाते थे नहाने, स्नान करने, and he used to polish that lota. And Sri Ramakrishna said, "Why do you do this?" He said, "Yes. So this is your lota. It has to be polished so that कुछ और भी इसमें आए other than your own ego." And I look forward to the communities of the future, which will be egoless communities from the human side and aided by robots and AI from the non-human side.
Thank you so much, Professor Paranjpe, for giving us time. I hope you had a good conversation, and I hope I was able to capture a little bit of what you are trying to do. I just wish, hope, and in fact cajole you to pick up his books, pick up his articles, pick up a lot. He has written a lot over a period of time. It is interesting also to read him because through him you get to know so many other people, ideas and ideologies that he has tried to meditate on. It's important that we read. It's important that we engage because that is what makes India the polyphonic voice that it is. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and I wish you well. I wish this forum and podcast well. And I hope you get many more such interesting conversations in the future.